Picture this. 1994. Jeff Bezos, making serious money on Wall Street, stares at a computer screen showing one terrifying statistic. In spring 1994, web usage was growing at 2,300% per year. Most people saw numbers. Jeff saw the future. But here's what no one tells you about that moment. Leave his six-figure salary, risk everything on this thing called the internet. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. What happened next would either destroy his career or change the world forever. On its soft launch in July 1995, Amazon sold $12,000 worth of books in its first week. But getting there meant one impossible choice. This is the story of Amazon. But it's really the story of a man who had everything to lose. Jeff Bezos wasn't just some dreamer with nothing to lose. At 30 years old, he was already the fourth senior vice president at D.E. Shaw & Co., one of Wall Street's most prestigious investment firms. Think about that for a moment. Most people spend their entire careers trying to reach that level. Jeff got there before his 31st birthday. The money was incredible, the respect was real, and every morning he walked into offices where brilliant minds moved millions of dollars with the click of a mouse. He wasn't just successful, he was on track to become extraordinarily wealthy. The kind of wealthy where money stops being a worry forever. His colleagues saw him as a rising star, someone destined for even bigger things in the financial world. But here's what no one tells you about success like that. It becomes a prison. Not because it's bad, but because it's so good that leaving feels impossible. Every bonus, every promotion, every handshake from powerful people, it all becomes another link in what they call the golden handcuffs. You're not trapped by failure, you're trapped by success. When Jeff started talking about leaving to start an internet company, people thought he'd completely lost his mind. An internet company? In 1994? Most people barely knew what the internet was. His colleagues at D.E. Shaw looked at him like he was throwing his life away. Here was a guy with everything: prestige, money, a clear path to becoming even more successful. And he wanted to give it all up to sell books online? The pressure was enormous. These weren't just random opinions from strangers. These were some of the smartest financial minds in the world telling him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. You can imagine the weight of that. When everyone you respect thinks you're wrong, it's hard to trust your own judgment. Think about what he was actually giving up. His salary alone was life-changing money for most people. But it wasn't just the current paycheck. It was all the future paychecks. The bonuses that would come. The partnerships he might earn. The respect he'd built over years of proving himself in one of the most competitive industries in the world. He was walking away from a guaranteed path to wealth that millions of people would kill for. And then there was Mackenzie. They'd gotten married just a year earlier, in 1993. She was brilliant too, a Princeton graduate working as a research associate at the same firm where they met. Imagine being newlyweds, finally financially stable, with this amazing life mapped out ahead of you. Then your husband comes home and says he wants to throw it all away to start a company that most people think is crazy. But here's where the story gets interesting. Mackenzie didn't try to talk him out of it. She didn't point out all the reasons it was a terrible idea. Instead, she became his biggest supporter. She saw something that even Jeff's colleagues couldn't see, that this wasn't just a reckless gamble. This was Jeff following something he couldn't ignore. When the time came, she would handle the bookkeeping, negotiate freight contracts, and pack orders herself. This wasn't just Jeff's dream anymore. It was theirs. Because late at night, when the office was quiet and the markets had closed, Jeff couldn't stop thinking about what he was seeing in the data. Web usage wasn't just growing, it was exploding. Most people looked at numbers like that and saw a fad, a bubble waiting to burst. Jeff saw something different. He saw the future arriving faster than anyone realized. The internal conflict was eating him alive. Every day he stayed at D.E. Shaw felt like another day he was missing the opportunity of a lifetime. But every day he considered leaving felt like he was risking everything he'd worked for. This is the psychology that keeps most people trapped forever. The fear of losing what you have becomes stronger than the excitement of what you could gain. What made everything change was a simple thought experiment Jeff created for himself. He called it his regret minimization framework. It sounds fancy, but the idea was beautifully simple. He imagined himself at 80 years old, looking back on his life. What would he regret more, staying on Wall Street or missing the chance to be part of the internet's early growth? When he framed it that way, the answer became clear. If he stayed at D.E. Shaw and missed the internet revolution.
This part of the program is sponsored by Via Nature, where nature meets innovation. Visit vianature.com. Your planet-friendly goodies are just a click away.
He'd regret it for the rest of his life. If he left and the company failed, he knew he wouldn't regret trying. He'd regret not trying. That framework didn't make the decision easy. It made the decision possible. The decision was made. Jeff would leave his corner office, his prestigious title, his guaranteed path to wealth. He would pack up their life and drive across the country to start an internet company in a garage. Most people thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But sometimes crazy is just another word for seeing something others can't. And what Jeff saw in those numbers was about to change everything. The statistic that Jeff Bezos read at D.E. Shaw & Co. was simple but staggering. 2,300%. That's the number that haunted his dreams. But here's what most people don't understand about that figure. In 1994, when someone said, "Web usage is growing 2,300% per year," many consumers saw the internet as an obscure experiment rather than a marketplace. Most folks had never even seen a website. But Jeff understood what exponential growth really meant. Think about it. If something grows 2,300% in 1 year, it's not just getting bigger, it's exploding. It's like watching a tiny spark become a wildfire. Most people saw a number. Jeff saw a revolution that was about to change everything. Here's where it gets interesting. While his Wall Street colleagues rolled their eyes at internet stuff, Jeff was doing the math. He knew that kind of growth meant millions of new people would be online within just a few years. Not thousands, millions, and every single one of them would be a potential customer for something. The loneliness of seeing the future is something most people never experience. Imagine knowing something huge is coming, but everyone around you thinks you're crazy. Jeff would try to explain what he was seeing, and smart people, really smart people, would just shake their heads. "It's a fad, Jeff. People will never buy things they can't touch." But Jeff couldn't shake what he was seeing in the data. Late at night, he'd run the numbers again and again. Web usage doubling every few months. New websites appearing daily. People starting to understand that this World Wide Web thing might actually matter. That's when he started his research. Jeff being Jeff, he didn't just jump into the first idea that came to mind. He reviewed the top 20 mail order businesses, studying what people were already buying through catalogs. Then he asked himself a simple question. What products would be even better to sell online? Books emerged as the perfect choice for their universal catalog data and delivery advantages. Here's why books were perfect. There were simply too many of them for any physical store to carry. Think about this for a moment. The biggest bookstore in the world might have 200,000 titles, but there were over 3 million books in print. That meant even the best bookstore was missing 95% of what customers might want. An online bookstore could list every single book that existed. No physical limitations, no shelf space problems. Jeff realized something else. Books were identical no matter where you bought them. The copy of a novel from an online store would be exactly the same as one from a local bookstore. Customers wouldn't need to touch it or try it on. Perfect for this new thing called e-commerce. But here's what really excited him. He discovered that no comprehensive mail-order book catalog existed. Publishers had tried, but the logistics were impossible. Too many books, too many publishers, too much complexity. An online catalog could solve all of those problems instantly. The more Jeff researched, the more he realized he was looking at the perfect storm. A product category with massive selection problems that technology could solve completely. And web usage growing so fast that millions of potential customers were coming online every month. You can imagine the pressure he felt. Every day he waited was another day someone else might figure this out. Jeff knew he wasn't the only smart person in the world. Other people had access to the same growth numbers. Other people could do the same research. The timeline was everything. In the technology world, being 6 months late can mean being irrelevant forever. Jeff understood that first-mover advantage wasn't just helpful, it was essential. If he was going to do this, he had to move now. Night after night, he'd validate his thinking. He'd run scenarios, check assumptions, look for holes in his logic. But every analysis pointed to the same conclusion. This was real. This was big. And this was happening whether he participated or not. Finally, he couldn't wait any longer. He walked into his boss David Shaw's office with his heart pounding. Shaw was more than a boss. He was a mentor, someone Jeff respected enormously. The conversation was harder than Jeff expected. Shaw listened to Jeff's plan and asked the obvious question. Jeff had a great job that paid incredibly well. Why would he risk that? Shaw even mentioned that D.E. Shaw might become a competitor if Jeff left to start an internet company. It was a friendly warning, but the message was clear. Think carefully about what you're giving up. But Jeff had already thought about it. He'd run his regret minimization framework. He'd done the research. He'd seen the future in that 2,300% number. The decision was made. 2 weeks later, Jeff and Mackenzie packed their car and started driving from New York to Seattle. During that cross-country drive, Jeff wrote Amazon's first business plan on his laptop. Mile after mile, he worked out the details of how to build an online bookstore that could reach every internet user in the world.
This part of the program is sponsored by The Tria, oasis of comfort with a touch of luxury. Visit thetria.com. Your dream home vibe is just a scroll away.
The moment he actually left his office, got in his car, and started driving toward a completely uncertain future, that's when everything changed. What waited for him in Seattle would test every assumption he'd made about what it really takes to build a dream. The 3-bedroom rental house in Bellevue, Washington, became Amazon's entire universe. Jeff's garage was now stacked floor to ceiling with books, shipping labels scattered across makeshift tables that were literally doors from Home Depot. Early employee Nico Lovejoy recalled Bezos buying doors from Home Depot because they cost much less than retail desks. Think about that for a moment. This is a guy who was making serious money on Wall Street just months earlier. Now he's building furniture from Home Depot supplies to save a few $100s. The reality was brutal. Every morning, Jeff would wake up and walk into what used to be their garage. Books stacked everywhere. And Jeff, he was on his hands and knees, packing books into boxes like any warehouse worker. Mackenzie wasn't just sitting on the sidelines cheering him on. She sealed freight contracts and filled orders during breakneck holiday shifts. When orders started pouring in during those early seasons, she was right there on the floor, packing books alongside everyone else. This wasn't some romantic story about a supportive wife. This was two people betting everything they had on something most people thought was crazy. The physical exhaustion was real. Imagine spending 12 hours a day hunched over boxes, taping them shut, printing shipping labels. Your back aches, your hands are covered in paper cuts, And every single day, you're wondering if this is really better than your old life. Because the doubt was always there. Jeff would look around that cluttered garage and remember his corner office at D.E. Shaw. The respect, the steady paycheck, the certainty. Now, he was basically running a mail-order business out of his house, hoping people would trust some website called Amazon.com to deliver their books. The financial pressure was mounting daily. They'd raised $1 million from friends and family, but money goes fast when you're building something from scratch. Every expense mattered. Every decision could make or break them. Jeff wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was the accountant, the shipping manager, the customer service rep, and the janitor. And then there were the technical challenges that nobody talks about. Building a website in 1994 wasn't like today. Most people barely knew what the internet was. Jeff had to find programmers who could create something that had never really existed before, an online store that actually worked. Finding books was another nightmare. Publishers didn't understand what Amazon was trying to do. Distributors were skeptical. Jeff had to convince people to ship books to some guy in Washington who claimed he was building the future of retail. But here's what made everything change. July 16, 1995. Amazon.com officially launched. In the first week, they sold $12,000 worth of books. To put that in perspective, that's more than most small bookstores made in a month. The second week, $14,000. You can imagine the emotional roller coaster. $12,000 felt like everything and nothing at the same time. Everything because it proved people would actually buy books online. Nothing because Jeff knew they needed to sell millions, not thousands, to build what he was envisioning. The small team was immediately overwhelmed. They'd set up a bell that chimed every time someone placed an order. At first, it was exciting. Each ding meant another customer, another validation. But the orders kept coming, and coming. Finally, they had to turn the bell off because it wouldn't stop ringing. Success brought its own problems. More orders meant more books to stock, more shipping, more customer service, more everything. Jeff realized he wasn't just building a bookstore anymore. He was building something that could scale to serve millions of customers. But something was shifting. Jeff started seeing patterns in what customers were buying. They weren't just ordering bestsellers. They were finding obscure books that no physical store would ever carry. Academic texts, foreign language books, poetry collections. This wasn't just convenient shopping. This was giving people access to books they could never find anywhere else. That's when Jeff realized they were onto something much bigger than just selling books. The internet wasn't just another way to buy things. It was a completely different way to connect customers with products. No physical limitations, no shelf space constraints, just pure selection. The decision to expand beyond books came in 1998. Music, videos, electronics. Each new category was a massive gamble. Every expansion meant more complexity, more risk, more ways for everything to fall apart. But Jeff could see what others couldn't. He was building what he called the flywheel effect. Lower prices brought more customers. More customers attracted more sellers. More sellers meant better selection. Better selection brought even more customers. The cycle fed itself. By 1996, Amazon had grown to 100 employees and $15.7 million in sales. They were calling themselves Earth's biggest bookstore with access to over 1 million titles. The garage days were behind them, but the scrappy mentality remained. What Jeff didn't know was that his greatest test was coming. A test that would make those early struggles look easy by comparison. March 2000. The dot-com bubble burst. Companies that seemed unstoppable vanished overnight. Amazon's stock? It fell from $107 per share all the way down to $7. Picture the scene. Tech companies were closing their doors every single day. Pets.com, Webvan, billion-dollar companies just gone. The parking lots at Silicon Valley offices sat empty. For lease signs appeared on buildings that had housed the future just months before. The fear was everywhere. Investors who had thrown millions at anything with .com in the name were now running for the exits. Employees at internet companies woke up each morning wondering if they'd still have jobs by lunch. The entire tech world felt like it was collapsing. And Amazon? Well, Amazon was getting crushed right along with everyone else. Here's what made it so brutal. Amazon actually had real customers buying real products. They weren't some fantasy company selling dog food online with no plan to make money. They had millions of customers who loved shopping on the site. Revenue was growing every quarter, but none of that mattered. The market looked at Amazon and saw just another .com, another internet company that would probably disappear like all the others. Think about that.
This part of the program is sponsored by Paws Wars. Gear up for happy tales. Sniff out pawswars.com, where your pet's wag comes with a splash of style.
If you owned Amazon stock, you watched 93% of your investment vanish. The media was brutal. Business magazines that had called Jeff a genius just months before were now writing Amazon's obituary. Amazon.toast became a popular joke. Financial experts went on TV explaining why Amazon would never make money, why internet retail was a fantasy, why Jeff had built a house of cards that was finally falling down. You can imagine what that felt like for Jeff and his team. They'd worked for years building something real. They had loyal customers. They were growing fast. But suddenly, everyone was treating them like they were frauds who had gotten lucky during the bubble. The pressure inside Amazon was crushing. Employees started updating their resumes. Some of the best people began taking interviews at other companies. Who could blame them? When your stock options become worthless and everyone says your company is doomed, staying feels crazy. Jeff had to make impossible decisions. Cut costs to survive, but don't cut so much that you destroy what you've built. Lay off people you care about, but keep the talent you need for the future. Save money on everything, but still invest in the technology that makes Amazon special. The cost cutting was painful. Amazon had to lay off hundreds of employees. They closed distribution centers. They canceled projects that had been months in development. Every expense got questioned. Every decision got scrutinized. But here's where Jeff showed something that separated him from other CEOs. While everyone else was panicking, he stayed focused on customers. Other companies were cutting customer service to save money. Jeff kept investing in it. Other companies were reducing their product selection. Amazon kept expanding theirs. The question everyone was asking felt like a knife. Was Amazon just another .com that got lucky? Or was there something real underneath all the hype? Jeff knew the answer, but proving it meant making moves that looked crazy to everyone else. While competitors were cutting their technology budgets, Amazon kept building better systems. While others stopped expanding, Amazon opened new distribution centers. While the world said internet retail was dead, Jeff bet everything that it was just getting started. Jeff's message was simple but powerful. Amazon wasn't like the other .coms. They had real customers who loved the service. They had real revenue that grew every year. They had real value that the market just couldn't see yet. And here's what made the difference. While companies like Pets.com were burning through millions with no clear path to profit, Amazon had figured out the fundamentals. Real customers buying real products for real reasons. Not fancy marketing campaigns or celebrity endorsements. Just people who found Amazon useful enough to keep coming back. The strategic moves Amazon made during the crash saved the company. They focused on what economists call unit economics, making sure that each sale actually made sense financially. They streamlined operations to reduce costs without hurting the customer experience. They negotiated better deals with suppliers because they had real sales volume to offer. Most importantly, they kept investing in the long term. Other companies stopped all new projects to save money. Amazon kept building the infrastructure they'd need when the economy recovered. They bet that the crash was temporary, but the internet revolution was permanent. The emotional toll on Jeff during this period was enormous. This wasn't just a business challenge. This was watching everything he'd built get destroyed by forces completely outside his control. The media attacks were personal. The stock price collapse felt like a judgment on his life's work. By 2001, something interesting started happening. While former competitors were closing their doors, Amazon was still there. Still serving customers, still growing revenue. Using $5.8 million in profit that year, Amazon proved it could survive and thrive. The dot-com crash had cleared out the companies that were all hype and no substance. Amazon survived because it wasn't just riding the internet wave. It was building something that would matter whether the stock market was up or down. Real value that real customers would pay for. Looking back, this was the real test. Not whether Amazon could grow during good times, whether it could survive when everything fell apart. But survival was just the foundation for what would become the most audacious business decision in retail history. February 2005. Jeff Bezos walked into a meeting with an idea so crazy, his own team thought he'd lost his mind. Pay us $79 and we'll lose money on every order? Picture the scene. Amazon's conference room filled with some of the smartest retail minds in the business. These weren't just employees. They were the people who'd helped build Amazon from that garage startup into a billion-dollar company. They'd survived the dot-com crash. They'd figured out how to make money selling books online when everyone said it was impossible. And now Jeff was proposing something that made no financial sense whatsoever. We're going to charge customers $79 a year, he explained. And in return, we'll give them free 2-day shipping on everything they buy. You can imagine the silence in that room. Free shipping? Amazon was already struggling with shipping costs. Every package they sent out cost money. Real money that came straight out of their profits. And Jeff wanted to give that away? The math seemed impossible. Think about it from their perspective. The average customer might order 5 or 6 times a year. At $5.10 shipping per order, Amazon was looking at $25 to $60 in shipping revenue per customer annually. Jeff was proposing they give all of that away and somehow make money on a $79 subscription? The internal resistance wasn't just about the money. These executives had spent years learning retail the traditional way. You sell products. Customers pay for products. You charge for services like shipping. That's how business works. Jeff was proposing they turn that entire model upside down. Instead of making money on each transaction, they'd make money on the relationship. Instead of customers thinking about shipping costs every time they bought something, they'd just buy things. The skepticism was brutal. Finance executives ran the numbers over and over. How many orders would prime customers need to place before the program made sense? What if people signed up, used the free shipping heavily for a few months, then canceled? What if competitors copied the idea and Amazon lost their advantage? Every scenario they modeled seemed to point to the same conclusion. Prime would cost Amazon millions of dollars, with no guarantee customers would respond the way Jeff expected. But Jeff saw something his team couldn't see yet. He wasn't just thinking about shipping costs. He was thinking about customer psychology, about how people make buying decisions, about the friction that stops customers from purchasing things they actually want. Here's what Jeff understood. Every time customers looked at their shopping cart and saw shipping charges, some of them abandoned the purchase. Maybe they only needed one item, and paying $6 shipping on a $12 book didn't feel worth it. Maybe they'd wait and try to bundle orders to justify the shipping cost. All of that friction was preventing sales. Prime would eliminate that friction completely. Customers wouldn't think about shipping costs anymore. They'd just think about whether they wanted the product. The risk was enormous. If Jeff was wrong about customer behavior, Prime could bankrupt the company. Amazon would be paying millions in shipping costs for customers who weren't buying enough to justify the expense. But if Jeff was right? If Prime customers really did start buying more frequently? If they became so loyal to Amazon that they stopped shopping anywhere else? Then Prime wouldn't just pay for itself. It would transform Amazon into something much bigger than a retail company. The launch was terrifying for everyone involved. Would customers actually pay $79 for a shipping subscription? Would they use it enough to make the economics work? Or would Amazon watch millions of dollars disappear into free shipping for customers who barely ordered anything? The early results were confusing. Yes, people were signing up for Prime, but they were also using it exactly the way Amazon's finance team had feared. Prime customers were ordering more frequently, but they were also ordering smaller quantities per order. Instead of waiting to bundle purchases, they'd order a single book on Monday, another item on Wednesday, maybe something else on Friday. From a traditional retail perspective, this looked terrible. More orders meant more packaging costs, more handling, more complexity. Amazon was spending more money to serve Prime customers, not less. But something incredible was happening that the spreadsheets couldn't capture. Prime customers weren't just ordering more frequently. They were becoming emotionally attached to Amazon. Think about the psychology. When you've paid for Prime, every Amazon purchase feels like you're getting a deal. Free shipping feels like Amazon is giving you something valuable. Even if you're buying the same products at the same prices, the experience feels better. Prime customers started choosing Amazon even when competitors had lower prices. The free shipping was so psychologically powerful that customers would pay $1 or $2 more for a product just to get that instant gratification of free delivery. The transformation was remarkable. Research would later show Prime members spend roughly double what non-members spend. They were visiting Amazon more often. They were trying new product categories they'd never purchased online before. But the real revolution was what Prime did to shopping behavior across the entire industry. Amazon had created a new standard. Free, fast shipping wasn't a luxury anymore. It was an expectation. Competitors scrambled to match Prime's benefits, but they couldn't replicate the economics. Amazon had scale that made Prime profitable. Smaller retailers couldn't afford to offer the same value without losing money on every customer. Prime had become something much more powerful than a shipping program. It was a moat around Amazon's business that made competition nearly impossible. But while everyone was watching Amazon dominate retail, Jeff was already building something else entirely, something that would prove even more transformative than anyone imagined. While everyone focused on Amazon's retail dominance, Jeff was quietly building the infrastructure that would power half the internet. Picture this: 2004. Amazon's engineers were drowning. The company's growth had created a monster they couldn't control. Every holiday season brought the same nightmare: servers crashing, websites going down, customers unable to buy anything. The infrastructure that worked fine for 1 million customers was completely broken at 10 million customers. Late nights in Amazon's offices became the norm. Engineers would scramble to keep the site running while orders poured in. One server failure could cost millions in lost sales. The technical debt was crushing them. They'd built systems quickly during the early years, patching problems as they appeared. Now those quick fixes were becoming expensive disasters. Jeff watched his team struggle with the same problems over and over: scaling servers, managing databases, handling traffic spikes. These weren't retail problems, they were technology problems. and Amazon was spending millions trying to solve them with traditional approaches that didn't work. That's when someone had a crazy idea. What if Amazon built their own computing infrastructure, not just for themselves, but as a service other companies could use? The concept was radical. Amazon was known for selling books and DVDs. Why would anyone trust them with their business-critical technology? The skepticism was immediate and brutal. Industry experts laughed at the idea. A bookstore company competing with Microsoft, IBM, and Google in enterprise software? It seemed absurd. These tech giants had decades of experience, thousands of engineers, and relationships with every major corporation in the world. Jeff's own team was divided. Building cloud computing infrastructure would require massive upfront investment with no guarantee of success. They'd need to hire hundreds of engineers, build data centers across the country, create software that didn't exist yet, all while their retail business was growing so fast they could barely keep up. But Jeff saw something others couldn't see. He imagined computing power like electricity or water, something you could turn on when you needed it and pay only for what you used. No massive upfront costs, no buying servers that sat empty most of the time, just pure, on-demand computing power. The vision was beautiful in its simplicity. A small developer could launch an app without buying a single server. They could test their idea, see if customers responded, then scale up instantly if demand exploded. No upfront capital, no technical expertise required. Just focus on building something people wanted. Think about what that meant. Every software company in the world was spending enormous amounts of money on infrastructure they didn't really want to manage. They wanted to build apps, not babysit servers. AWS could handle all the technical complexity while companies focused on what they actually cared about. The technical challenges were staggering. Amazon's engineers had to build systems that could handle any type of workload. Banking applications, video streaming, scientific research, social media platforms. Each one had completely different requirements, but AWS had to serve them all reliably. Convincing businesses to trust Amazon was even harder than building the technology. Imagine being a CTO at a major corporation. Your CEO asks why you want to move critical systems to a company known for selling books online. Your job could be on the line if something goes wrong. Amazon's competition had every advantage. Microsoft already sold software to every major corporation. Google had proven they could build massive, reliable systems. IBM had relationships going back decades. They all had credibility in the enterprise market that Amazon simply didn't have. But AWS had something the competition didn't understand yet: real experience running massive consumer-facing systems. Amazon knew what it felt like when millions of people tried to use your service at exactly the same time. They'd learned lessons about scale that enterprise software companies had never faced. The launch in 2006 was terrifying. AWS launched with simple storage service, S3, and elastic compute cloud, EC2, betting millions on an idea most people thought was crazy. Jeff wasn't just risking money, he was risking Amazon's reputation. If AWS failed publicly, it could damage the entire company. The first customers were mostly startups and small companies. They couldn't afford traditional enterprise solutions, so AWS felt like a miracle. Pay-as-you-go pricing meant they could start with almost no money and scale up as they grew. But everything changed when larger companies started paying attention. In 2009, Netflix began using AWS for their streaming infrastructure. Suddenly, millions of people were watching movies powered by Amazon servers. If AWS went down, Netflix went down. The pressure was enormous. More companies followed. Startups that grew into billion-dollar businesses, government agencies handling sensitive data, financial services companies managing people's money. Each new customer was validation that AWS wasn't just a side project, it was becoming essential infrastructure for the digital economy. The transformation was remarkable. By 2015, AWS was generating over $10 billion in annual revenue. More importantly, it was incredibly profitable. While Amazon's retail business operated on thin margins, AWS delivered huge profits that funded everything else Jeff wanted to build. AWS had become something much bigger than anyone imagined. It wasn't just a product, it was the foundation that powered half the internet. When you used Netflix, Spotify, or thousands of other services, you were actually using AWS without knowing it. Jeff had done it again. He'd seen a future that others couldn't imagine, invested heavily in building it, and created something that changed entire industries. The bookstore company was now powering the digital revolution. But building an empire this vast doesn't happen without consequences. Success stories always focus on the wins. But what about the people who paid the price for Amazon's relentless growth? The warehouse workers, the small businesses, the communities? Workers walked up to 10 miles per shift and faced intense rate-based quotas, according to employee accounts from fulfillment centers across the country. The pressure is crushing. Miss your targets? You get written up. Miss them too many times? You're gone. This is the reality behind Amazon's incredible efficiency. Every package that arrives at your door in 2 days represents someone pushing their body to the limit. Workers describe the environment as brutal and exhausting. Some say they must cheat the standard just to meet the impossible quotas. Others report ignoring safety procedures because following them means falling behind. Think about what that means for a moment. Amazon's success depends on human beings moving faster than their bodies want to move. Day after day. Month after month. The turnover rate in some fulfillment centers reaches 150% annually. That's not a job. That's a revolving door of human exhaustion. The numbers are staggering. Amazon employs over 1 million people. Worldwide, most of them work in these warehouses. They're the invisible army that makes Prime possible. But here's what gets really complicated. Many of these workers need the job. In October 2018, Amazon raised its minimum wage to $15 an hour for all U.S. employees, more than double the federal minimum. In many small towns, Amazon is the best-paying employer available. So what do? Criticize a company for providing jobs that people desperately need? Or ignore the human cost of making everything faster and cheaper? Jeff's response to these criticisms was typically methodical. Amazon added air conditioning and heat stress protocols per OSHA requirements. They raised wages. They added safety programs. But workers still describe the same relentless pressure, the same impossible targets, the same physical exhaustion. Here's where it gets really interesting. Amazon's efficiency didn't just change Amazon, it changed everything. Small bookstores that had served their communities for decades started closing. Local electronics stores couldn't compete with Amazon's prices. Main Street businesses watched their customers disappear to their phones and computers. The economic impact was massive. Traditional retail jobs disappeared by the hundreds of thousands. Sure, Amazon created jobs too. But warehouse work is different from retail work. It's more isolated, more physically demanding, less personal. The grandmother who worked at the local bookstore for 20 years. She's not going to transition to racing around a fulfillment center. Think about what happened to entire communities. Small towns that built their identities around local businesses suddenly found their downtowns empty. The social fabric that came from local commerce, knowing the store owners, running into neighbors while shopping, started unraveling. Amazon's tax strategies made things even more complicated. While local businesses paid their full share of taxes to support schools and infrastructure, Amazon used sophisticated accounting to minimize their tax burden. The company that was destroying local tax bases was also avoiding contributing to them. The irony was brutal. Communities would offer Amazon massive tax incentives to build fulfillment centers, hoping for economic development. But those same incentives often cost more than the long-term benefits. Local governments would give away millions in tax breaks, then struggle to fund basic services. Jeff faced congressional hearings about Amazon's competitive practices. Lawmakers grilled him about using seller data to develop competing products, about leveraging the marketplace to disadvantage partners, about creating conflicts of interest by running both the platform and selling products on it. You can imagine the pressure he felt during those hearings. This wasn't just business criticism anymore. This was questioning whether Amazon had become too powerful for democracy to handle, whether one company should control so much of how people shop, read, and even think. But here's what made everything so complicated. Millions of customers genuinely loved Amazon. The convenience was real. The selection was incredible. The prices were often unbeatable. Small businesses might hate Amazon, but consumers voted with their wallets every single day. Amazon's environmental impact added another layer of complexity. All those Prime deliveries meant millions of trucks on the road, massive carbon emissions, endless packaging waste. Jeff responded with the climate pledge, net zero emissions by 2040. Amazon ordered 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. They established a $2 billion climate fund. The human stories behind Amazon's growth are what make this so difficult to judge. Workers who describe the warehouse conditions as brutal, but also workers who say Amazon saved their families from poverty. Small business owners who lost everything to Amazon's competition, but also entrepreneurs who built million-dollar businesses selling on Amazon's platform. Communities that watched their downtowns die, but also communities that got economic development from Amazon facilities. Customers who love the convenience, but worry about what they're supporting with every purchase. The question that haunts Amazon's success story isn't whether Jeff built something incredible. He obviously did. The question is whether the price was worth it, whether the benefits to consumers justify the disruption to everything else. By 2021, that question would force Jeff to make one final calculation about everything he'd built. 2021. Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO of the company he built from nothing. Looking back at that terrified Wall Street executive from 1994, was it all worth it? Picture the moment. February 2021. Jeff announces he's transitioning to executive chairman, handing over daily operations to Andy Jassy. After 27 years as CEO, he was stepping back from the company that had consumed his entire adult life. Amazon now employed 1.3 million people worldwide. Revenue had reached $386 billion annually. The market value exceeded $1.6 trillion. Think about that transformation for a moment. The guy who packed books on his garage floor was now one of the most powerful people on earth. The panicked decision maker who couldn't sleep at night, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd built something that touched billions of lives every single day. But here's what makes this story so complicated. What did Jeff gain, and what did he lose along the way? The gains are obvious. Wealth beyond imagination. Global influence that shapes entire industries. The ability to fund projects that could change humanity's future. When Jeff decided to focus on space exploration through Blue Origin, he could write billion-dollar checks without thinking twice. When he wanted to fight climate change, he pledged $10 billion through the Bezos Earth Fund. The personal costs are harder to measure. Jeff's marriage to Mackenzie ended in 2019. The woman who had supported his crazy dream, who had packed books alongside him in that garage, who had believed in Amazon when no one else did. Their partnership couldn't survive what Amazon became. You can imagine the weight of that. Success often costs relationships. The relentless focus required to build an empire leaves little room for anything else. Jeff had achieved everything he'd dreamed of, but the personal price was enormous. The societal impact is even more complex. Amazon created millions of jobs, but destroyed millions of others. It made shopping incredibly convenient, but hollowed out communities. It democratized access to products, but concentrated economic power in ways that worried governments worldwide. Jeff's current projects reveal something interesting about his mindset. Blue Origin isn't just about space tourism. It's about moving heavy industry off Earth to preserve the planet. The Bezos Earth Fund isn't just charitable giving. It's investing in technologies that could reverse climate change. Even his ownership of the Washington Post represents a belief that independent journalism matters for democracy. These aren't random investments. They're the choices of someone who knows he has the resources to tackle humanity's biggest challenges. Jeff isn't just spending money. He's betting on futures that most people can't even imagine. But here's what sustained Amazon through every crisis, every period of doubt, every moment when the future seemed uncertain. Jeff's Day One philosophy. He refused to let Amazon think like an established company. Day One meant staying hungry. Day One meant treating every day like you're still building something, not protecting something you've already built. That mindset carried them through the dot-com crash when everyone said internet retail was dead. It pushed them to launch Prime when the economics seemed impossible. It drove them to build AWS when no one understood why a bookstore would compete with Microsoft. Day One thinking meant never getting comfortable, never assuming success was permanent. Even as Amazon grew to employ over 1 million people, Jeff insisted on maintaining that startup urgency. Big companies move slowly because they're afraid of making mistakes. Day One companies move fast because they're more afraid of missing opportunities. The transformation from that panicked moment in 1994 to stepping down as CEO in 2021 wasn't about eliminating uncertainty. It was about learning to thrive in it. Jeff discovered that the feeling of standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything, that feeling never goes away. It just gets bigger. What makes Jeff's story so compelling isn't just the business success. It's the courage to act when you can see a future others can't imagine. That terrified moment in 1994 when he stared at the 2,300% web growth number, that wasn't weakness. That was the natural human response to recognizing an opportunity so big it could change everything. Most people never face that moment. They live comfortable lives, make safe choices, and wonder what might have been. Jeff felt the same fear everyone feels. The difference is what he did with it. Every empire starts with someone brave enough to leave their comfortable cage and step into the unknown. Every breakthrough begins with someone willing to risk everything they have for everything they could become. The transformation from that garage in Bellevue to stepping down as CEO wasn't just about building a company. It was about proving that someone willing to act on what they see can reshape the world. That moment of panic in 1994, it wasn't weakness. It was the natural human response to seeing an opportunity so big it terrifies you. The question isn't whether you'll feel that fear. It's what you'll do with it. Right now, somewhere, someone is staring at their own version of that 2,300% growth number. Maybe it's you. Maybe you can see something others can't. Maybe everyone thinks you're crazy for even considering it. Your moment might be waiting for you.